What's up? Welcome to another episode of Just Give Us a Minute. I'm your boy Smitty.
I'm L.
All right, man. What's going on, L? How you doing, brother?
I'm doing pretty good. And I just want to say what we always say. Just give us a minute of time to put something on your mind. We got something special for you today.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm really excited about this episode. So please, stay in there with us. I know normally we give y'all a lot of laughs and jokes, in the past episodes, and not that we can't do it now, but we definitely want to take this serious because it's a serious matter. So before we get started, I want to kind of just go through who our guest is and kind of give her background. Matter of fact, let's just do it this way. Star, how you doing?
Good. How about you?
Good. How about you give us your background?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So again, reintroducing myself, my name is Star Abdelhadi. Thank you so much for having me, guys. I'm really excited to raise awareness and bring awareness to something that's been an ongoing crime and concern of a lot of people. My background is in cybersecurity. I graduated from Utica College with my master's degree in cybersecurity and emphasis in computer forensics. Most of my studies has revolved around cyber sex trafficking. I've also worked with victims of rape, domestic violence, and sexual assault.
Wow. So let's just jump right into it. That's a lot. And the thing that I'm really looking forward to with this episode is that this is not a topic that you hear people talking about that often, right?
No, not at all.
National news, when something happens, like they do a sex trafficking ring or something like that, but just on a normal everyday conversation, we don't have these conversations. And you posted something a couple of weeks ago, which made me want to reach out to you about, joining us on the show. So again, thank you for that. So let me ask you this, just kind of starting out here. What are some of the best ways to prevent being a victim of sex trafficking, or is there really a way that you can prevent it?
Honestly, that's definitely a two-part answer. There are several ways to prevent it. And the good thing about the internet is that it does help shed light. People are really good about spreading the word. You do have some fake news, which sometimes can cause issues. But in the realms of prevention and the best thing that you can do, because again, sex traffickers with the internet are becoming more savvy. It's a very lucrative industry. They're becoming a lot smarter, and social media in the sense kind of helps them in a way maintain their identity, and it allows them to kind of step out of the light and that traditional form of sex trafficking that you see, or the physical ideal of sex trafficking sometimes comes in the light of prostitution. So when you think about prostitution, you think about seeing somebody physically out in the street. Well, those sex traffickers are now able to hide in the shadows with the internet. So ways that you can prevent that is with social media, for example, you have a lot of younger audiences now on the internet. You have TikTok, Snapchat. They're not aware that sex traffickers are posing as people that they might be familiar with. So if it's a 14-year-old girl, 16-year-old girl, they're going to steal pictures from the internet and pretend to be a guy maybe similar to their age. They post where they're at on the internet. People share their locations now. Sex traffickers can see that. They can become relatable to them. So the best way for prevention is private social media accounts. If you're under the age of 18 and you're not aware of someone that you actually don't know, like I feel like when we're older, we can see that, like, don't know you. No, I'm not going to share that information. But there is a caveat to that as well. So if you are older, you do have fitness models, for example. I myself have done modeling before, and I've competed. And I know a lot of my friends who have been potential victims to sex traffickers who now pose as photographers, videographers. They've even associated themselves with known organizations like fitness clothing lines. And, everybody wants to get out there and market their social media. So when you do have those, reach out to those other organizations, like confirm where that email's coming from. Confirm that this person is actually affiliated with that organization. Do your research even. You can research on the internet phone numbers, names, ask for more information from them to confirm that they are who they say they are. If they want to meet at somewhere, or if they have a location that they want to meet you at, make sure it's a public place. Don't disclose your personal information or send them pictures of you that aren't already on your page, of course, without confirming that they are who they say they are. So just, it's okay to ask more questions and probe. Another thing I would suggest for people is if you are interested in an opportunity and you're unsure, because again, they can establish a social media page and come off as who they say they are. So it's very believable. Like you just, it's easy to believe. Take a friend with you, confirm that you're going to have somebody with you. And I would say for the younger generation, that's where I feel like it's hardest to prevent, because you can be the parent that sets up those guidelines, sets up the privacy accounts, but you have these girls who see things that they desire or want, and sex traffickers know how to market towards that, how to gear towards that, the lifestyle, the glamorous Instagram lifestyle. And these younger girls, they want that. So if a sex trafficker is posing as someone like that, they'll fall for it.
That's good that you kind of said that. You kind of referenced young girls. I was going to ask you, what age group do you see that is most impacted by sex trafficking?
I would say at the youngest, 14. Between the ages of 14 and up, really it's a very broad range, because again, sex traffickers are becoming more savvy, so they know how to pose to gear and work with adults and trick them, and they know how to also deceive younger audiences. But the most vulnerable, I will say, are between the ages of 14 and 16, because unfortunately you are seeing them on social media, and sex traffickers are posing as people that they'd be able to relate to, like another high school boy, or maybe a recruiter that's really interested in them and thinks they have potential or sees something in them. So ways to prevent that is definitely, as a parent, be active in your child's life and in everything that they're doing. If they have a cell phone, there's a lot of security measures now that a lot of these cell phone developers and software developers have created to prevent that. So I definitely would say that if it is between the ages of 14 and 16, honestly, prevention is only going to be effective as if there's an adult involved, or if they're educating their children. Like, that's fine. If you're going to have social media, or if you know that you can't 100% be there with them 24/7, because kids can be sneaky, then teach them like the dangers, like show them the real cases of what they could substantially put themselves in, the positions they could put themselves in.
I want to say this as a parent, and of course I don't have any data on this or anything like this, but to me, it doesn't seem like parents are teaching their children the old school way of don't talk to strangers.
Yeah.
That's simple. It seems because our kids nowadays are so willing to get involved with people that they don't know. And you could tell them about the scams. You could tell them about, the way that sex traffickers and people like that move. And they're so willing to talk to people that they don't know. It seems to me that parents aren't teaching them stranger danger. Don't talk to strangers. Walk the other way. So it just seems like an uphill battle when it comes to the social media, because you can't keep them off of it.
No. And people have that misconception that sex trafficking victims are those who are limited in resources, but really social economics do not play that big of a role in who can become a victim. I mean, you can have somebody who lives in the suburbs, comes from a great family, wealthy, goes to an amazing school, and they could still be a victim, no matter how well off they are, how good of a family background. They can come from a healthy family with healthy adults in their lives. And that doesn't change anything, because again, with the internet and technology evolving, sex traffickers now have a wide variety of people that they can reach out to and potential victims they can touch. So yeah, no, I agree with that. I think prevention can really become more effective if we actually have people and parents, adults, teachers, mentors, coaches becoming proactive. And even social media developers and creators, like creators of Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, they too can help prevent it by being proactive in protecting younger audiences by raising awareness. And I think the best way to prevent or to decrease the crime itself is by raising awareness. And like you said, we don't have that anymore. Social media is not really screened or protected.
Right. So let me ask you a question. I know we're speaking of social media, but what are other ways that sex trafficking occurs? Because, like, I know for a while there was a big deal about watch out for the white vans in Walmart and things of that nature. So, what are some of the main ways that you see this occurring?
Yeah. So there are other forms of sex trafficking. It's like you said, it's not like your traditional, the van pulls up and kidnaps the person, or it's not even just international. A lot of people think sex trafficking victims are migrated to the US and sold in the US or trafficked. You still have them here now where, for example, there was actually a documentary on Backpage. It was on Netflix, and drawing a blank on the name, but it's by Mary Mazzeo. And in the documentary, I'm actually going to look it up because it's a really good documentary to reference. They basically discuss girls who were sex trafficked in the US from various different demographics. And they were actually trafficked on Backpage, which Backpage, a lot of people don't know what it is, which is a good thing because it really was just basically the owner of and the creator of that site was receiving money from sex traffickers to omit certain keywords that are supposed to flag when you post an ad on there. But he didn't let that happen because he wanted to make money. So he was profiting off of girls who were missing. And these were runaways. So runaway victims are probably the most popular victims of sex trafficking. And of course, it varies between the ages of 14 and 16. They get upset. They're, for whatever reason, if it's a healthy environment in their home, whether they run away from maybe domestic violence in the home and they meet somebody, sex traffickers can pick up on that too. They can sense victims of domestic abuse. And for a girl who's been domestically abused, or a boy, a woman or man, to them, any type of love or any form of affection or any form of caretaking is better than where they just were. So if they're trafficking, it wasn't initiated that way. The sex trafficker generally will target victims who were previous victims of another crime, and they will groom them. And sometimes it's use of drugs. So a lot of the times these victims are so high off of drugs, and they were already in such a down place that the sex trafficker plays on that. And by the time they're being trafficked or just in the process of it, they've already given up hope. They've already given up the idea of leaving because, again, where did they just leave from? Like, what situation was better than where they were previously? And in the cases where they didn't come from such a bad home, but they did run away because, of course, the world seems like it's over. You get into an argument, you run away. And in those cases, that is the more aggressive, unfortunately, side of things where it's kidnapping involved, forced into the industry. They're not as eased into it. They're more so forced on the drug. So the sex trafficking popular drug of choice is heroin, and it's a very addictive drug. And once sex traffickers get you addicted on that, you basically will do anything for the drug. So even if you started off kidnapped and forced into it, by the time they're done with you and you are so young, you've already been broken down so far to where you don't want to go back home because it's shameful facing your parents, or even times they manipulate people and threaten their family members and they don't know any better. So that documentary was a perfect example of domesticated sex trafficking occurring within the US, and victims who were on Backpage and their parents would see them on Backpage and they'd report that to the police. But of course, Backpage, the owners of Backpage did nothing for it. So it became this huge door that opened up for the world of sex trafficking, and all of the parties involved that were employed with Backpage were actually prosecuted. It was a long process. Some of the victims were found, and a lot of them did not survive, which in most cases, if they're younger, they don't survive that type of crime.
One of the things you touched on and I think it's good that we kind of expound on that, is that it's not just young ladies, it can also be
Mhm.
males. Can you kind of speak to that? Because a lot of people always, they want to look at women as victims, the only victims, but we know that men get molested or men get kidnapped. I mean, all of these different things can happen. Can you kind of expound on
Mhm.
that, or how how much that actually happens?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I feel like male victims is something that does not get enough attention, and that is because to the general public, it's unheard of, and it doesn't get the sympathy that female victims would get. And honestly, some sex traffickers are actually female, because that's the best way to get somebody to trust you. They don't look at a female as being someone who'd be so deceptive. They look at you as a nurturer. So some of the sex traffickers promote their sex trafficked victims to becoming sex traffickers themselves. So that documentary, I Am Jane Doe, that's what it's called on Netflix, sheds light on that too. With that being said, male victims are perceived as either they're lying, they're not telling the truth, or they wanted that. Like, how come you didn't defend yourself? You're a male. But it breaks them down. And it's because a lot of them, regardless of their sexual preference, they look at them as that was a choice. It's really hard to prove as a male victim that you are actually a victim because you're judged instantly. And there are several organizations that are now coming into play that are geared and specifically dedicated for male victims, so that way they're not afraid to speak out. Because that's another thing too, male victims don't get acknowledged because it's not reported. So not all cases that exist are actually reported, because not all male victims are speaking up. Majority of these male victims are not speaking up. They're actually suicidal. And so they don't survive the crime because they just don't see the point. They're humiliated. I mean, no one's good. They don't believe that anybody's going to back them up. So, for example, Restore One is an organization that I was a board of director for, and it specifically was geared towards providing safe houses and rehabilitation for male victims. And you're starting to see several of those grow and shed light, but the issue is funding. A lot of organizations also cannot stay afloat for male victims because of lack of funding. And the reason why there's lack of funding is because there's lack of reported cases. So I think another form of awareness that would be helpful is to acknowledge male victims, regardless of how minimal the number of reported cases are. Because again, the only way these organizations are going to get funding is either through sponsorships, or if we do have enough of the numbers to show that it is significant that males are also victims of domestic violence, assault, sexual assault, and sex trafficking.
Mm.
So, is there? I know it's not always the case, and you kind of touched on social economics and different things like that. But do you see the perpetrators or sometimes victims of past abuse, or it's just like you understand what I'm saying? Because I look at a domestic violence standpoint. Like, I grew up in a home where my mother was beaten by my father, right? But for me, it gave me a different outlook on women, right? I'm more of a protector. I can never abuse a woman, right? I saw it. I saw the impact that it had, and for me, it just made me frown upon it. Whereas some men, I grew up that way, and they carry that trait into their relationships because they saw their father doing it. It's like it's okay, it's normal. Do you see that correlation a lot, or is it more so that they were a victim and now they're the perpetrator?
So that's a tough one with sex trafficking. With domestic violence, it's definitely notable. And there's a lot more data and research on the correlation to that. Like you said, for your example, it's a perfect example with domestic violence abuse. 9 times out of 10, the victim is going to suffer some type of PTSD. And in turn, they're either going to go one direction and be completely against it, and like you said, being on the opposite and the more positive side of that, Or in some cases, a lot of the times the victims repeat that behavior because in their minds, that's their only form of love or their only way of knowing how to show that type of, to them, that's a form of love or affection where they give and take and manipulate because that's how they were shown love. But then a lot of them, it's a sense of power. If they felt like they did not have any power or control when they were the victim, they now become the abuser because they want to feel that power and control. Now, with sex trafficking, the hard part is you have these perpetrators who may have been victims of sexual assault or may have been sexually abused. And in turn, that is how they ended up in the business. Or, for example, as I said earlier, with women being part of the sex traffic ring, it's because they were sex trafficked before. And to them, this is a moving up in the industry. You've been in it for so long that you don't look at it as a crime or yourself as a victim anymore. So they move you up and they groom you now to help them traffic younger girls because now you're no longer being used because you're older and you're no good to them. And you can now help them manipulate and groom girls. So a lot of those sex trafficking victims feel like they have no place to go and it's too late for them. So they start doing the same thing. They become the sex trafficker themselves, and these women are grooming younger girls, and it's just becoming this vicious cycle where they're not getting out of the industry. Instead, they're helping it grow because, again, it's better than what they were doing before. It's like you're either going to keep getting trafficked or we have to kill you because you're older, you don't have any use for us, and we need younger, fresher women. It sounds harsh, but it's the truth. And that's their option. Instead of death, they pick, well, okay, I'll do this and I'll become a trafficker too because I moved up and I'm technically free now. But you do have the caveat to that. A lot of victims of sex trafficking who actually have done amazing work. They've helped several organizations, non-government officials, private organizations, not-for-profit. A lot of these people leading these organizations or raising awareness were victims of sex traffickers, and they have the best knowledge, and they can help out everyone else in the best way possible. So you do have that other light to it where if they do get out of it, a lot of them do go back into the world and do good and help raise awareness and help fight against it.
So let me ask you something.
Well, we definitely heard about it too. So go ahead, El. But I was going to say we're going to definitely post some information where people can out of
Absolutely. I have several links for you guys.
Or be a part of the mission as well. But go ahead, El.
This is terrifying for me, right? Because I have 4 girls, right? And I understand that, this happens to males as well. But in my personal life, I have 4 daughters, right? So this is something that really gets to me when I have these type of conversations. So, and I'm gonna ask you a question. You may not know the answer to it, right? But let's say somebody found their selves in that situation. What can they do? Is there anything they can do, or is it just kind of you just caught in the mix and to get them? Is there any way they can get themselves out of it?
No, that's a great question. And honestly, that is tricky. So I will say for people who are currently in it, it sometimes can be a very, very dangerous environment. So if they have the option, not all of them have the access to cell phone usage or the internet, but if they do have that option, there are several organizations now that have become, and I'll definitely give you those guys their contact information. But a lot of times right now, if you just do a basic search, there's victims hotline support groups. So it's not reaching out directly to law enforcement because that kind of is counterproductive when it's like the victim reaching out and initiating it. It's better to work with an organization and then they correlate your contact with the law enforcement. So what a lot of these organizations are doing is they're making it a lot easier to remain anonymous when reaching out. but also in a way to where they can find a way to link up with you, to meet up with you, to reach out to you, figure out exactly where you are so they can get you away safely. The problem is when you are in that environment, they really do minimize your ability to contact. And honestly, without putting yourself at risk, depending on how involved that organization is, or how dangerous they are, because a lot of people have more leeway than they realize and are able to get out of it, but they're scared still because they don't know who's going to believe them, where to go. Like, what do you do after that when you've been on so much drugs, like, and you're addicted? So in most cases, if they do not have a way to reach out or contact, I would say if there is an opportunity where it's safe and they can remove themselves and be able to contact someone, a lot of these organizations have made it very, very easy. And even in some cases, they will come pick you up instantly. No questions asked. They will come pick you up and take you to a safe house. But that's the problem, is being able to make contact or reaching out, because they often don't have access to a cell phone. Some of them do. You have seen in some cases where they do. And those are the ones that I was telling you about earlier, where they don't appear in the psychology of a traditional victim. Because a lot of times, even when they're out and they're in the hospital and you're providing rehabilitation services to them or therapy to them, they always almost go back. They almost always go back. So we have had cases where victims were out, they had services, they were rehabilitated, but they go back. And part of that issue is they don't know how to adjust back into the community, into the real world. They don't know how to clean up from the drug rehabilitation. And it's unfortunate, because you would think that once they're out, it's like you can be out, you're fine, you're safe. But a lot of the times they go back, because what else do they know at this point? So it really does depend on how far they've been in it.
Yeah, I'll say this, like Elle said, I mean, I'll have 3 little girls, and by nature, I'm very protective. We can be in Walmart, and no matter where we're at, always locked in on my kids. Like, I'm always locked in on it. So from that standpoint, I would just say, as a parent, watch your kids. I would say, we always worry about being overprotective. That was a term used a lot when we were growing up. Oh, you're too overprotective, and now they want to see what the world is like. My thing is, as a father, I want to be as protective, because one thing I don't want is to say that I was too lax in my kids.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, definitely, yeah, I don't know, man. It's definitely a tough conversation to have, but one that we need to have. But what's some ways that people can reach you directly?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I have been working on my social media page. So the best way to reach me is Instagram. There I'll start posting even more now. You'll see my contact information, emails there. But the reason why I say my Instagram is the most effective is because I'm actually revamping that and in the process of it to raise awareness more on sex trafficking, domestic violence, sexual assault. And that's also the best place to find all of the resources, whether you're a victim or a survivor and you still need ongoing services, or if you know someone that may be a victim, or if you just want to become a part of the cause and you want to raise awareness. I have several access to resources and organizations, ways you can volunteer, ways you can help, any information or questions anyone may have. And so my Instagram is, and I'm sure you guys will know, Teddy, when you post this as well, but it's I_inspire, and that's EN as in Nancy, SPYRE.
Good deal. Good deal. So let me ask you this before we go. We was kind of touching on it before we started. You used the word survivor, and I think that was the word I needed to use when I was talking to you. When you have somebody that survives this ordeal, to hear when you said they go back, that just crushed me. But what are they like psychologically? Do they have PTSD from the situation? Obviously, they're coming off of drugs the majority of the time. What are they like?
Honestly, it varies. So we do like to use the word survivor more often than victim, because they did survive something so surviving something as traumatizing as being sex trafficked is a very empowering term for them. So we no longer like to associate them as victims. Even if they go back, we still like to refer to them as survivors, because that's still something we can never hone in on why they go back, why they do what they do. We don't try to judge them or the choices that they make, because we're not in their shoes. And one thing I like to do is I individualize each survivor. I never like to categorize their experiences into one bucket. And so the psychology of them, it's very much different from any other cases that I've seen or victims that I work with of any other type of assault, because they all tend to vary and they're very hard to predict. One thing I will say is that never underestimate a survivor or victim of sex trafficking, because they're a lot stronger than people tend to think. So a lot of these organizations bring them in and they want to coddle them, and they want to tell them what they need to do and how they can help them, and this is what they need to do to feel better. And you can't do that, because that's all that they've been told majority of their life when they're sex trafficked, is they're being controlled. And the last thing they want to do is be controlled again. They need to feel empowered to make their own choices, to have their own freedom, their ability on how they want to rehabilitate, whether it's a religious perspective or whether it's through health and fitness, or maybe it's just through mental health for them. And I think that a lot of organizations lack in the process and the steps that it takes to properly rehabilitate them, because again, their psychology is survival methods. So if they've been sex trafficked, chances are they've survived that with you, and they're there. Unlike most of these victims who've committed suicide, unfortunately, and we cannot help them. You have to look at it from a standpoint as they're still in survivor mode. So just because you got them out doesn't mean they're instantly going to trust you. Right. They can be very aggressive. And sometimes you could risk putting yourself in danger approaching a survivor directly. So I would say psychology-wise is to be very cautious, because you have to think the things that they went through, the things that they've seen, and how long they've been through it. They're not going to be that hopeless, harmless victim that we see them as when we want to help them. So they don't need that hug. They don't need that coddling. They don't need that comfort. What they need is someone that they can trust in relationship building and empowerment to make their own choices.
And one other thing I'm gonna say is man. I'm glad that you spoke on it, like just for lack of a better term, like it's localized, because a lot of times when we hear about sex trafficking, we think about somebody snatching our kid or grabbing our kid and shipping them overseas somewhere. Yeah. So it's just good to know that there the different facets of sex trafficking, and it's not always what we see in the movies where somebody's snatched up and sent over to wherever, to go through the deal.
About it is when you see it in the movies, and that's what disturbs me, because it happens. Walk in Walmart to see this whole wall of missing kids or boys and girls. We need to bring more awareness to it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'll definitely email you guys all of the links here for all the organizations, international or not international, but within the US that are nationally recognized, as well as a lot of the local ones, such as MOXA, Metropolitan Organization Counter Sexual Assault. They also assist and work with any victims, sex trafficking, rape, domestic violence. They have a broad variety of resources, and they're recognized within the Midwest. So they're very helpful as well. So there's several organizations now that I will say, to the benefit of social media, that can market better and touch more audiences and reach out to people more. But yeah, definitely just everyone can contribute if they just keep their eyes open. And if they notice anything suspicious, like you said, it's better to be overprotective rather than to blow something off and think that, oh, that's just normal, they're fine.
Right.
Absolutely. But Star, I want to thank you for joining us today, man. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, it has.
Like I said, we'll post that data with the podcast. So thank you for jumping on. any last words before we go?
Absolutely. No, thank you guys so much. And I look forward to sending you guys this link. I hope everyone who watches this, I hope it helps open eyes and shed light on this ongoing crime. So thank you guys.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye. You have a good night.
Thanks.